Hi, I'm Bill Poston, and today I'm in London, England. And what is the particular building that we're in?
We are in Wesley's Chapel, City Road, and at the moment we're in the crypt, in a room which we call the Philadelphia Room because Methodists from Philadelphia helped to finance the refurbishment of it.
And what do you do? What is your name and what do you do here at Wesley Chapel?
My name is Jennifer Potter, and I am one of two full-time ministers, and I do what most ministers do around the world. I take services, I go to care for people, pastoral care in their homes or when they come here. I write for the church magazine, I conduct funerals, weddings and baptisms, and I engage in all sorts of ways in the community, in schools and with our interfaith community.
This is kind of the center of Methodism, isn't it, throughout the world?
We would like to think so. We call ourselves the Mother Church of World Methodism because this site is very close to the Foundry, John Wesley's first London headquarters, and also because Wesley was here for the last 12 years of his life, living on the house on this site, and he is buried to the rear of this chapel.
How did Wesley create the Methodist movement?
Well, if you want it in a word, I would say unintentionally. I'm not sure how many people know as it were, the backstory. John and Charles were Anglican priests. They had been ordained. They went to what was then Georgia in the American colonies, partly because they were still seeking for a deeper spirituality, a deeper relationship with God. That didn't happen. There were many things that didn't go well when they were in Georgia, but they did meet the Moravians and were very impressed by Moravian liturgy, by Moravian fellowship, by the way Moravians conducted themselves. So when they were back in London, they linked up with this Moravian society in Fetter Lane, just off modern-day Fleet Street, and worshipped with them, as well as attending Anglican services. And they went apart from them over the whole question of quietism. The Wesleys were rather more active in their faith than some of the Moravians. So they set up a meeting, a society, as early Methodist groups were called, in the Foundry, not far from here, the original Canon Foundry that they took over and refurbished. And that was intended to be an additional spiritual resource for people. People would go to the parish church and then they would come on to the Methodist meetings later. That is why, up to this day, Methodist church services start at a different time from Anglican church services. Over time, as he travelled around the country, other preachers joined him. Methodists became a much bigger group of people, many of whom had never really had a link with the Anglican Church. So increasingly, Methodism took on an identity of its own. But it was always intended by the Wesleys at the outset to be a renewal movement within the Anglican Church in Britain in the 18th century.
One of the powerful structures that they built into the early movement was this concept of society. Can you tell me about how that worked?
Well, a society was a group of people who, it had a membership, that people were known. In the Anglican Church, because an Anglican church serves a parish, everyone who lives in that parish is nominally, at any rate, a member of the church. So they, by and large, don't need to keep lists, whereas Methodists kept lists of everything. And so a society was a group of people who were known. Gradually, they were divided up into bands and classes, which were mutual support groups for spiritual growth. And then when societies grew, they were grouped into circuits, and eventually the circuits were grouped into districts, and throughout the length and breadth of Britain, all these Methodist worshipping communities were part of one connection, spelt with an X in 18th century style. So we still, when ministers are ordained into the Methodist Church in Britain, they are still ordained into full connection.
Wesley actually preached in Wesley Chapel. What was he like as a preacher, and why did he publish his sermons?
Right. Of course, Wesley preached in the Foundry, the predecessor to this building. He preached here, and he preached all around the country. He travelled 250,000 miles on horseback in his life. What sort of a preacher was he? Well, I don't know about your congregations, but if you asked that question in a congregation, you would get perhaps as many answers as you had people in the congregation. I think I can say this. The general impression was that George Whitefield and Charles Wesley were better preachers in the sense of engaging with their audiences. John was, at least in origin, very academic. He'd been through Oxford. He preached in the University Church in Oxford. He knew how to construct an academic theological sermon. And if you read some of his sermons, they read in such a way as you can wonder how these sermons actually enthused miners or farm workers or the people that he went out to preach to. I think over time, Wesley adapted his preaching style to the nature of the audience, but we cannot know that. Why did he publish his sermons? Well, first of all, it was quite common in Britain at that time to do that. And secondly, by doing that, they could get wider circulation. And I think also because Methodist theology was contained both in hymns and in sermons, rather than in books of systematic theology, by publishing his sermons, preachers in training or those who joined the Methodist movement could read these as a guide, not so much to their own preaching technique as to the theology and the emphases of the Methodist movement.
Now, we've mentioned the Foundry a couple of times, and the fact that it was in this general geographic vicinity that we're in right now. It served as a sanctuary, you said, where there was preaching, but it was also more than that in the way that it reached out to the community.
Mm-hmm. It was a relatively small building, but they managed to do a great deal in that small building. So in addition to the preaching place, the sanctuary, they had a school for both boys and girls. They had a clinic. They had a book room because Methodists from the very beginning were urged to be reading people. So they published their own books and stocked other people's books in order that Methodists should have material to read. They had an almshouse for elderly people. And it was also the place from which they reached out to the community. So looking after the needy, and especially in terms of going just down the road to where Newgate Prison was and ministering to both prisoners who were in the prison and also those on death row whom they accompanied to the scaffold at Tyburn, which is close to the modern-day Marble Arch.
Who are these people that Wesley was serving through the Foundry, through the societies in 1700 London?
Well, it was a great range of people. Some were ordinary artisans, bootmakers and sailors and just ordinary people in London. Some were, for example, one of the things that they did at the Foundry was to have a revolving loan fund. People could get £5 to start up a business. And one person who did that set up a bookseller's that became the equivalent to modern-day Waterstones, or in the States, Barnes and Noble, so that people tended to go up the social scale often. But they also had a ministry to upper middle-class society and aristocrats. Some people may have heard of the Countess of Huntingdon, who was a follower of Wesley, but eventually set up her own independent connection called the Countess of Huntingdon's Connection. But the type of people were across the social spectrum, but of course, because the poor were the most needy, they were the ones to whom Wesley most went, because he said, "Go not just to those who need you, but to those who need you most."
What led to the opening of Wesley Chapel?
As opposed to the Foundry.
Correct.
Right. Wesley's Chapel, by the way, we call it Wesley's Chapel as a shorthand, but even officially in the British Methodist Church, this is not known as that. It's known as City Road Church, because Mr. Wesley would not have wished for a chapel to be named after him. The reason for the move here was varied. Secondly, the Foundry was in a bad state of repair. It was letting in water. Their repairs were no longer holding. And the whole movement was growing. So he needed a bigger place. So he applied to the Corporation of the City of London for land and struggled to get a place near to the Foundry, eventually getting this.
What does it mean to you to be a part of that legacy, to be a part of City Road Church of Wesley Chapel?
It means a great deal. I've been here now for 12 years, and it's always tempting when you walk into Mr. Wesley's house to take off the alarm, or you go into the museum, or you go to the grave, for it to become a commonplace because you do it every day. But because we have visitors, Methodists from all around the world, who come here on pilgrimage, and for whom this will be the one and only visit, and who are absolutely in awe of the place, and who want to soak up every bit of their own heritage, it constantly reminds us of what an important place we have custody of, not for ourselves, but for Methodists worldwide. And it constantly sends us back to read Wesley, to think about him, and to remember the legacy and the footsteps in which we tread.
Most of the people that I believe will be watching this will be Methodist in North Carolina. I'm from a Methodist church in North Carolina. Why should someone at a Methodist church in the U.S. and North Carolina be concerned about the happenings of the church here in London today?
Well, I hope they will, because of connectionism, because we feel a connection to Methodists worldwide. At the moment, our conference is going on in Birmingham, and we have 2 representatives from the United Methodist Church in the United States there, along with people from 1/3 of our partner churches, 30 churches from around the world. So just as Methodists within a country or within a state feel a connection with one another because of our organisation and history, I hope that we feel a connection with you, and that you reciprocate in feeling a connection for us. I do need to say that in the 1970s, this building was in the process of falling down. It had to be closed for 5 years. And if it were not for the support of Methodists from all around the world, not least from the United States, this building would not be here today. So it is not only part of the heritage for North Carolina Methodists, there's part of them and their ancestors in this building in terms of the gifts and the prayers and the good wishes that have been given on our behalf throughout the years.
We've been talking with the Reverend Jennifer Potter. She's the assistant pastor at Wesley Chapel, the mother church for the Methodist faith. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you.